Okay, so in today's lecture, I want to address the topic of security. Clearly, a pretty important topic from the perspective of business firms. They certainly want to secure their data and applications. So let me load the presentation. Share application screen. All right, so you should be seeing the slides. So let's talk about why security is so important. Well, there are so many threats that are out there. Everything from Trojans and viruses and worms that are referred to as malicious software or malware that people are trying to introduce into the IT infrastructure and corrupting the databases, stealing data, destroying data. Then also we have other kind of disasters like Hurricane Katrina, 9/11. Those too are, in a sense, breaches of security because the IT infrastructure was destroyed in those cases. And we also have problems like in disgruntled employees who are who are stealing intellectual property from within the company. So clearly, there is a lot of threat to the IT infrastructure and the corporate data. And when companies look at this problem, they often, as we have seen through examining various cases, that they often have a sort of a knee-jerk reaction to this. They go out and buy expensive security software. They go out and hire security firms to get all defended and protected against these threats. But that's often not the best approach. What is recommended these days, what the security gurus recommend, is that you first set up a security framework. In other words, you have to have an informed plan of action. And how do you build that plan of action? Well, it's through setting up the security framework, where the first part of that framework is you assess what your threats and risks are. So don't just go out and implement a lot of security technology. First, assess where the threats are, where the threats are coming from, what is the impact that they have. So that's all part of the threat assessment. Once you've assessed the threats, once you have some idea of what you're facing, then you define policies, security policies. Policies define what you need to protect. You see, not everything needs to be protected at the highest level of security. Security is expensive. You go out and hire these security vendors, well, they'll cost an arm and a leg. So once you have an idea of your threats, then figure out what you need to protect. Consider a company like Boeing, even a company like Boeing that has very, very valuable information that they need to protect, like the blueprints of their stealth aircraft, the F-22 Raptor. A lot of foreign countries are trying to steal that. And so they need to obviously protect that with the highest level of security. But do they need to protect their mail server, which is keeping just general run-of-the-mill type of mail, like, hey, a mail about when is the next conference, or when is the next meeting? Well, that mail does not have to be protected with the same level of security as the Raptor stealth aircraft blueprint has to be protected. So the security policies identify what it is you need to protect. Once you've assessed your threats and you have some feeling of who's out to get you and on what, then that rolls into the second stage of defining security policies. The third stage is applying the solutions, and these solutions are also called security controls. So this three-part framework, or your informed plan of action, is first do the threat assessment, then define the security policies as to what you need to protect, and thirdly implement the technologies, the security controls, to protect what you need to protect. So the first part of threat assessment is trying to see where the threats are really coming from, because not all companies really have a good idea of where the threats are coming from. Actually, ironically, the most common form of threat is the employee, not a disgruntled employee, a good employee, an unsuspecting good employee of the company who's browsing on the internet, and their internet surfing behavior, their interaction with the internet, both in terms of related to work, and also, as we have seen, not every person can be. We've talked about the agency costs. That's a part of life. I mean, people are going to surf on the internet during the workday. They can't be 100% every second dedicated to work. And they could also be surfing on the internet for work-related purposes, and yet introducing threats and malicious software into their environment. So, when we talk about Trojans and viruses and worms, where do they come from? They actually come from an employee's browsing behavior on the internet. And this is often not widely recognized, that the employee itself is becoming a source of threat. Is a source of threat because their browsing behavior introduces this malware into the IT infrastructure. And these viruses and worms reproduce, which means once they come into a particular employee's PC and they've infected that particular employee's PC, then the worm or the virus is going to reproduce and then go and infect the servers. Once they've infected the servers, well, the servers, then they have access to the database that is attached to the server. Could be either directly attached storage. We have looked at the DAS model, or it could be storage disks behind a SAN, storage area network. But once they're in the servers, then they have access to the storage disks that hold the data, and they can destroy the data, they can change the data, they can steal the data, they can do whatever they like. So indeed, the network is a great source of threat. And with wireless networks, and that is, we have Wi-Fi everywhere. The problem is further compounded because with the wireless network, now you can just, with the wireless network, you can just stand somewhere within the vicinity of the network, and with a RF receiver, you'll get all the packets being transmitted on the network. You don't even have to make any kind of a physical tap on a line, on a communication line, or hack into a router to pick up the network packets. You just stand there with an RF receiver, and you pick up all the network packets. So if your intention is to steal information, well, you can steal the information from what is flowing on the network, from looking at the network packets. If they're not encrypted, the internet by default, it does not apply encryption. So the internet by default, everything is flowing. All the packets are flowing in what we call clear text. They're flowing in the clear. The contents have not been encrypted. So this network really is a source of problem in many senses, all the way from that's through where viruses and worms get installed, through people also picking up the network transmissions that's flowing on the communication lines. So I dropped a few terms, viruses, worms, and Trojans and whatnot. So let's understand the distinctions between them, and let's also understand how they get into the IT infrastructure. Viruses and worms have what's known as a two-part structure. In other words, they have a malicious payload and they have a reproductive part. So there's a malicious payload, that's the destructive part, and they have a reproductive part. And once the virus, the worm, gets installed on your PC, the reproductive part is what reproduces that and infects those servers. And both worms and viruses do that. The malicious part is the malicious payload, which will get released, and depending on what it has been programmed to do, it could destroy the hard data on the disk, whatever it has been programmed to do. And often it could be triggered by certain conditions. Time could be a condition. We talked about the Y2K virus. Well, the Y2K virus was something that was timed to release its payload as the year 2000 dawns. So that could be the malicious payload. There are certain circumstances by which it's triggered. Now, the difference between the virus and the worm is that the virus is a piece of software that is parasitic, meaning, and that's why it gets the term virus. It's a parasite, which hides in a known file type. So the virus hides in an Excel file or a PowerPoint file or even a Word document. Now you may ask, well, how does it do that? Well, these programs like Excel, they offer the ability to have macros. So the Excel file, and even with Word and other software from Microsoft, you can embed macros in them. And macros are basically small programs. I mean, it's a computer program. A macro is a computer program. And when you open that file, and how do you open that? How does that file come in? It comes in oftentimes as an email attachment. So again, it goes back to the browsing behavior. So the general employee, not a disgruntled or malicious employee, is sitting on their computer and browsing the internet, going to various websites, or receiving communications by people from outside. Somebody sends them an email. It has an attachment, and that attachment could be a Word document, could be an Excel file, could be a PowerPoint. The moment you open that attachment, the macro that is embedded in that file slides into the computer. And if it's a malicious macro, meaning it's a virus, then you've basically just allowed the virus to get into your PC. And the thing is that the person sitting at the PC has full administrative privileges. Well, on most PCs, they have administrative privileges on their PC. So you're actually opening up and allowing a piece of software, this macro, to run in a high privilege process. Because you were in the high privilege administrative process when you were doing the browsing, or you were downloading an email and opening the attachment inside it. You're in a high privilege process. You have administrative privileges. So now you just allowed this destructive program, the macro, to do whatever it wants, because it too is now running in a high privilege process in the PC. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to install itself in the PC, if you will. And then it will reproduce, infect other servers, and then under certain set of conditions, it will release its malicious payload, which could be, like I said, erasing the hard drive on your PC, or the servers that have been infected. Well, they could erase the storage, the data on the storage disks. Worm is not a parasite. The worm has a very similar structure as a PC, as a virus does. But it's not a parasite in the sense that it's not hiding in a known file type. So it's not hiding in a Word document or hiding in a Excel spreadsheet as a macro. So typically the worm gets into the PC through browsing, through the web browsing behavior. In other words, when you go to again, as you're surfing the internet, you're basically bringing down web pages, the HTML pages, into your browser. The HTML page is also a script, can have a script. And so there could be a script, essentially a computer program. Now, the thing is that the browser offers what's known as a safe sandbox, meaning what the browser is giving you is an environment, a computing environment, which kind of restricts what. So when you're downloading a web page and it has a script in it, well, that web page and the script in it is running in what is known as a safe sandbox, meaning meaning anything inside that safe sandbox cannot do anything malicious to the rest of the rest of the rest of the computing environment that you have on your PC or server. It can't destroy data. It cannot erase applications, erase data, that kind of thing, because it's supposed to operate in a safe sandbox. Okay, now there are two problems. The first problem is that no browser, no piece of software for that matter, can be 100% foolproof and perfect. There are loopholes in the safe sandbox environment that can be exploited. People who make these worms, and they're clever people. People who make all of these viruses and worms and Trojans. Well, not all of them, but some of them are extremely clever people, and they know how to, and they know that browsers do have vulnerable points in the sandbox. They do have loopholes in that sandbox, and they can exploit that to get into the computer, get into the PC. They can exploit the weaknesses of the safe sandbox. That's why you see you get all these. You get periodically you get patches to correct problems with that with the browser. So whatever browser you're using Google or Firefox or whatever, or Chrome, whatever is your popular browser, or in Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge. Well, they are periodically sending you patches to upgrade that browser, and part of what's in the patches is somebody had discovered some kind of a loophole in this sandbox environment, and the patches for the purpose of fixing that loophole. So any piece of software will have loopholes. So the worm. So when you're downloading, we're trying to get in a web page which has a worm embedded in it. One of the ways is it exploits the loopholes in the sandbox if it can find them. The other way is that when you install plugins. So oftentimes when you're surfing the internet, you'll get these messages. Okay, you got to install this plugin or something for it to run. Well, that plugin does not operate inside the safe sandbox. So here's a big difference. The plugin that you install, the plugins or add-ins that you're installing on your browser, and oftentimes you're installing these plugins and add-ons as you're surfing, because you see, hey, you're trying to download and view some web page, and they say, hey, you need to install this plugin to see it, or do whatever, and you effectively allow that plugin or add-on to be installed in your browser. The plugin or the add-on is not restricted to the safe sandbox. So the worm could be in the plugin, and that is by no means, that is not restricted, that is not constrained to operate just within safe sandbox. To find the loopholes in the safe sandbox, that is a much more tricky process. That's not that easy to do, but it has been done, which is why you get all these patches from the browser vendors upgrading their browser software, upgrading the version. But if you've installed the plugin and you don't really know who made the plugin, sometimes the plugin can pretend to be made from a known software vendor, like the Adobe Flash plugin, but it may not be Adobe's Flash plugin that you're actually installing. It could be somebody else's who's pretending to be Adobe's Flash, the Adobe Flash plugin, and that could have the worm in it. So it's so the worm gets in again through the surfing, where you are surfing web pages, and the web page can have a script, which is a computer program, which could try to exploit loopholes in the safe sandbox of the browser, or it could, as you are browsing and they're telling you to install this plugin or add-on so that you can see that you can do the next thing, and you inadvertently allow those add-ins and plugins to be installed, then the worms could exist in those add-ons and plugins that you have installed on your PC as you're doing your browsing, on your browser as you are doing the surfing of the internet. So that's typically how worms get in. So they don't really hide in Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word or PowerPoint as macros. They are more coming in embedded in the web page or in the plugin that you've installed on the browser. Trojans, how do Trojans come in? Trojans are often some part of the operating system, like a device driver. So the Trojan pretends to be a useful file, a useful part of the operating system. Device drivers are often Trojans. The Trojans are often made as device drivers. I shouldn't say device drivers are Trojans. No, the bulk of the device drivers are legitimate device drivers, but Trojans can be made as device drivers, pretend to be device drivers. And they're again very cleverly done. So the Trojan, you don't quickly suspect that this is a Trojan because the Trojan is mimicking the behavior of the actual software. So it could be mimicking the behavior of the actual legitimate device driver. So you don't suspect that this is a Trojan, which is why I said these are cleverly made, and there's often some very smart people in Eastern European countries that make these viruses and worms and Trojans. They seem to spend their life doing this. Yeah, but it mimics the behavior of the legitimate device driver, so you don't suspect it's a Trojan. But it does have a malicious payload in it, which will get released again under some set of circumstances. Spyware. Spyware has a kind of almost a controversial position, if you will, in the sense that many people don't view spyware as malicious, and I actually belong to that camp, but the book has a slightly different implication or connotation, and I'll explain that. So spyware, as it was developed, was really about user profiling. So it's that's why it got the name spy. It's trying to observe what you're doing on the internet, what websites you're going to, and it's forming a profile on you. And so, spyware, it has also gotten a lot of attention in the times we live in of big data, because big data and all its connotations is really about a part of it is forming profiles on what you're doing on the internet, what websites you're going to, and the technology for monitoring this is part on the browser. So it's relying on the cookie. The cookie, I think we may have mentioned at some point earlier in the course, is a small text file which identifies who you are, what your web IP address is, and things like that. And if you're logged in somewhere, what your username is. So the cookie is a small text file in your browser that identifies who you are. And when you're sending out HTTP requests, GET requests to get web pages, well, that cookie is going along with that request. And therefore, on the receiving end, they can see who's coming in to make the request. And the web pages that you're touching and you're downloading, they also have what are known as web bugs in them. And that's what allows at the remote end for the monitoring to take place as to which web pages you have touched, because those web pages have web bugs in it. So it's the combination of the cookie and the web bug that allows your browsing behavior to be minutely tracked. So it is not so much a malicious computer program that has been installed into your PC, which is the case for a virus, a worm, and a Trojan. A malicious computer program has gotten installed in your PC through different approaches. All three use different approaches. The virus, the malicious program, is part of the known file type, an Excel file, a PowerPoint file, a message, an email message, it could be there in that. Essentially, it's the attachment. The attachment has the malicious software. The worm comes in through the browsing behavior. It could be part of the plugin to a browser. It could be exploiting the loopholes in the safe sandbox the browser provides. The Trojan is often a software driver that you're installing from the internet, which mimics the functions of the actual driver, but it has a malicious payload as well. So all three of these are computer programs that have gotten installed in your PC, and if they're replicated, which is the case for viruses and worms, so then they've also got installed in servers. The spyware, as it was originally known and defined, isn't something that's installed in your PC or your server. Now, and like I said, it's through the combination of the cookie and the external web bugs that your behavior is being monitored. Now, the book makes a slight confusion in the sense that it also calls keyloggers. So software that's monitoring the keys you're pressing, they're known as keyloggers. It also calls keyloggers spyware. And it offers the example of the Zeus, Z-E-U-S. But it also says there that the Zeus was a Trojan. So it's curious that they're offering that they're using a Trojan to point to give you an example of malicious spyware. They're trying to say spyware can be malicious. Spyware can be bad, and I'll talk about user profiling, but it's bad in the sense of intrusive user profiling. That's the negative aspect of spyware, the very intrusive user profiling, which spyware does. But the spyware doesn't really. I mean, this example that they gave of the Zeus software, which is a keylogger, which is picking up the keys you're typing on your keyboard, and that is quite malicious because then it'll pick up the password that you just entered to get into your account get your brokerage account at Charles Schwab or wherever you have your brokerage account. Then it's picking up the password that you're typing in. So that's very malicious. But the Zeus software is actually a Trojan, and the book actually acknowledges it's a Trojan. So why call that spyware is what mystified me, and probably others as well. Spyware is not viewed as malicious programs installed that have gotten installed on the PCs, the servers. Spyware's native connotation is the intrusive user profiling that it's doing, and a lot of people don't like that. And with big data and everything, we're getting more and more into that kind of environment where our individual freedoms are being sort of compromised as we are being monitored more closely in a big brother type of environment. So that's the negative aspect of spyware, but it isn't really malware installed on your PCs or servers. At least that's my interpretation, and an interpretation held by many other people. Otherwise, why distinguish if then the way the book is trying to explain that, well, then what's really is the difference between Trojans and spyware? Then if malicious key logging is spyware, there's a lot of it's blurring the distinction between these two categories. My thinking on it is that Trojans and spyware is quite distinct. In other words, it is not malware that's installed on your computer. Keyloggers is malware that's installed in your computer, but the keylogger is a Trojan. It's not spyware. And the book is using the example of a Trojan. The Zeus software that it refers to is a Trojan. It's not spyware. It's a Trojan. Okay. The service attack again is something that is not associated with malicious software installed on. I just want to make sure of the video was at the right as the right decibel level. Okay. So the denial of service attack is, again, not something that is installed. It is not something that that is necessarily installed on the firm's IT infrastructure. It is something that, so let's say you are a firm like Charles Schwab, and Charles Schwab business comes from the stocks and bonds that Charles Schwab's customers are buying and selling through Charles Schwab, through their brokerage accounts. So there is a brokerage application, which is a mission critical application for Charles Schwab, and that is what is that that is something that that if people are prevented from doing their transactions, buying and selling stock on Charles Schwab's brokerage server, then obviously Charles Schwab's business is highly impacted. A denial of service attack tries to do just that. It tries to prevent legitimate users from doing business with a legitimate application on a server. So what it does is that somebody who's initiating a denial of service attack from Charles Schwab, on Charles Schwab, what they would do is they would bombard the Charles Schwab brokerage server with bogus requests. And they'll be sending these bogus requests at such a high frequency that no legitimate user will be able to get through with their legitimate request to buy and sell some stock. So as an example, where you can ask, what kind of bogus requests are they sending? Well, on the Charles Schwab brokerage, on the Charles Schwab website, one of the things you can do is open an account. So they could be these external agents that are trying to launch a denial of service attack. What they're going to be doing is they're going to be sending requests to open an account at Charles Schwab when they have no real interest in actually doing anything with that account. They're just trying to flood the Charles Schwab web server with bogus requests for opening an account in order to prevent the legitimate users from getting through and doing their legitimate transactions. These external agents that are launching these bogus requests, and they're launched in a synchronized fashion from many originating PCs or servers. And these originating PCs or servers are called a botnet. So there are thousands of bogus requests coming in from these individual pieces and servers, that form this botnet, and they're doing this in a synchronized fashion. And by doing so, they're flooding the Charles Schwab's web server and preventing any legitimate transactions from getting through. So this is not again something that's being done through hacking into Charles Schwab servers and installing malware on Charles Schwab servers. No, this is being done purely externally, and it's nothing. There's been no malicious software installed anywhere on Charles Schwab's IT infrastructure. So this is a denial of service attack, which, by the way, is a computer crime because it is denying Charles Schwab from doing its legitimate business. So it's a computer crime. So in general, what is a computer crime? So I introduced the notion of computer crime, calling denial of service attack is a computer crime. So in general, computer crime has been defined very broadly. It's anything which is criminal activity, but done with the help of computing technology. So that's computer crime. So more specifically, all of these things in this list is all of these things are computer crimes. So if you hack into a server and you don't really destroy anything or steal anything. You just hack into the server, which means you've tried to find the password and guessed at the password on some account that resides on that server. So hacking into the server would mean you've been able to get into the server by discovering the password. Basically, you tried many different types of combinations of passwords, and you found the password that lets you get into an account. Sometimes it's not that difficult to find the password because oftentimes people use people use their mother's maiden name or their friend's address or something, birth date or something like that, and so sometimes it's not that easy to go through various combinations to discover what the password is and to get into the account. So just doing this, having found the password, gotten to do an account of the computer that you were not authorized to use, that is a computer crime. So if you're caught doing that, well, they will give you, and these penalties have been made very stiff. So that's been another impact of computer crime legislation, that they're set up to really deter computer crime. So some of the penalties here can be quite stiff. And of course, if you broke in and then you did the other thing, which is theft of trade secrets. So you broke in not just for the psychopaths may break in just for the pleasure of breaking in. Industrial espionage people break in not for the pleasure, but for getting trade secrets. So it's not just foreign intelligence agencies. Yeah, they are targeting more the military secrets, but there is industrial espionage going on across the board, which may not be limited to just military secrets. You are breaking in to get other valuable information about your computers, maybe about your competitors, maybe about your competitors' strategies and plans. So that's theft of trade secrets. Both are deterred by the law. So even the social psychopath just breaking in for the heck of it, well, they're deterred as well, since just hacking in is computer crime. And if you hacked in and then stole something or destroyed something, well, then your penalties would be even stiffer. Denial of service attack, here you didn't break in. You did not break into any computer. You just stood outside the company's network and you just bombarded it with bogus requests, denying the ability of the company to do business. But that too is computer crime, and you will get penalties. So these penalties are basically jail plus significant fines. And of course, cyber terrorism, all of that is very much crime. But even something as mundane as writing an email. A lot of people, when they are sort of angry with somebody, something happened, they dash off an angry email to that person. But the advice is don't do that. Don't send any email to anybody which has some heat and anger in it, and it could be construed as a threat to that person. That is a computer crime as well. So as you can see, the net has been spread quite vast in defining what computer crime is. Now, the government is attacking the problem not just from the perpetrator side of things, so people who are doing the breaking in and stealing data, falsifying data, destroying data, but it's also put the onus on companies. So if you are Charles Schwab and you have financial data about your customers, you better believe that you have to protect it. So you can't leave it out there to be stolen. You have to protect it robustly. And so we have various laws, like the Gramm-Leach is on protecting financial data. The HIPAA laws are protecting medical information about employees. So if somebody has come in and stolen that data, then the firm that has the data on its corporate service is liable as well. So coming back to the security framework, what we're talking about here is the first stage of kind of thinking through what your threats are. And also, as part of that first stage, you also have to do a value assessment of that threat, meaning if that threat actually happened, what would be the damage and put a monetary value on that. So if somebody came in and, let's say, stole financial data, well, then the firm could face a lawsuit from that kind of a breach from the person whose data was stolen, and that lawsuit would result in monetary damages against the firm. So you can certainly try to put a monetary value on what happens if this type of security breach occurs. Then put in a probability of, what's the probability, what's the likelihood of this security breach occurring. And the multiplication of that probability and the magnitude of the loss is the kind of the expected monetary loss. And this helps you for home in on obviously the threats where the magnitude is high and the probability is high. So it helps you in prioritizing the threats. But one other thing that it has done, and there have been studies done to show this, is by doing this kind of a study of finding a monetary impact by multiplying the probability of that security breach occurring and the magnitude, is that research had shown that company managers often tend to discount low probability events altogether. That's why nobody really did anything much to about what would happen if a 9/11 type of event happened, or if a Hurricane Katrina type of event happened, because managers sort of dismiss those as low probability events. And there is a human tendency that has been shown by studies, social studies in sociology and psychology, that people tend to think that, well, very low probability events I don't have to bother about, but because they will never happen. Now, what this type of assessment methodology does is that, yes, it recognizes those are low probability events, but the magnitude of the impact may be so large, as it was in the case of both 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. The entire data center was gone, and as a consequence of that, basically business function was lost for a long period of time, which means that the impact on the company was extremely large. So when you multiply an extremely large number with a small low probability number, the product of the two still leaves you with a reasonable number, which means you should buy it. So this methodology of the threat assessment framework has actually been beneficial in putting a focus on even low probability events like Hurricane Katrina or 9/11, because the impact would be so large that the multiplication of low probability, that very large impact, still leaves you with a sizable monetary loss, which means you should think about those type of low probability events happening as well. So, well, now after you've done this, after you've done the threat assessment, you've recognized, well, who your threats are, where is it coming from, everything from people trying to be social psychopaths who are hacking in and maybe destroying stuff just for the pleasure of it, to people doing industrial espionage, to people introducing, again, viruses and worms and whatnot, whether for the purpose of industrial espionage or they're psychopaths. Well, the end result is the same. So you need policies to protect yourself. But security is expensive. You're going to end up hiring security vendors who are experts in this stuff. You're going to end up buying software and specialized hardware from them. All of that is going to be expensive. So you have to decide um, what should you protect? What should you protect? Even a company like Boeing, which has secrets to protect, or certain, um, in fact, the government has this very much in place. Again, highly security conscious parts of the government, like the DoD, Pentagon, the Department of Defense, or the State Department. They have two email systems. They have a secure email system, and then the run of the mill email system. So the secure email system is for secure communications. The run-of-the-mill email system, the general email system, is for everything else. Like I said, you don't need to spend time and money on protecting an email. That's an email about, where is the next meeting, or when is the next meeting, or where is the conference room for this meeting. But, there's a huge percentage of email within these departments are actually email that don't need to be protected. So why spend the money and effort in protecting those? So therefore, they protect their secure email servers, which obviously need to be protected, but they don't apply the same level of protection to their general email servers. So that's a policy which is determining which servers to protect. And policies apply at several levels. So at the level of servers, yes, they're about which servers you would protect, which software applications you would protect. At the level of users, they're about policies about, well, what level of privilege do you give to various users? As I was mentioning in my own career, well, I could read and write. I had read and write access to all the net data, which was the NetView was the product that I was managing back in my corporate years. I had read access to other products related to my product portfolio. I did not have write access to them, which is exactly how it should be. So policies should be established on a need to know basis, as we say. So you have policies about users as well, in terms of what applications they have access to, what data they have access to. You can also have policies around the availability of services. So we referred to mission critical applications, like the brokerage application at Charles Schwab is a mission critical application. And you need it to be available. If you're Charles Schwab, brokerage application has crashed, and it's out to lunch, if you will. It's inactive for a certain appreciable amount of time. Then Charles Schwab will be losing a lot of business during that time. So you have policies that define how available should this server be. There's a term in industry called 5 nines of availability. What this term refers to is that this server, this application, must be available 99.999% of the time. That's a pretty high level of availability. So we'll talk about, well, how do you achieve that availability when we come to controls. But the first thing is to establish availability policies. And again, the availability policies, everything this is going to be achieved through backup servers. So right there is the cost of security. The fact that you know how to use a backup server. So obviously, because it's cost of security, you have to again think of what services should I make available at this very high level of availability. Do all my services need to be available at this high level of availability? No, of course not. There are some services that can tolerate a certain amount of outage, and they don't have to be instantly available in real time all the time. So those are policies on availability. Okay. So now let's come to the third part. This is just an example of a security policy This is at the level of users. Like I said, policies can apply at different levels. This is a policy about what data elements can people access. So this is a policy that is saying that, well, if you're a clerical person in the organization, the HR department, you do not have access to salaries of people. But if you're a manager, yes, you do have access to salaries of people. So that's just an example of a policy applied at the user level in terms of the level of access that they have to different types of information. Security controls are the technology. What's the technology that we will use to implement the security policies that we have based on the assessment that we've done of our threats? So that's the third stage of now implementing the technology. And it need not always be super duper technology. It could be, even a physical control, which is keep sensitive information locked up in a physical safe. Well, that is a control as well. The safe is the control as well, the physical safe. So that too is a control. But obviously, most of the time when we talk about security controls, we're talking about IT-based, technology-based security controls. So let's talk about the first thing, which is hacking into the system. How do we control that? Well, how do you get into the system? Well, typically the process is that you type in a username and then the password. That's how you get into the system. So the password is the authentication control. There's also a very weak authentication control. Typically, if you're not using and enforcing long, randomly generated passwords, then this password control is a weak control. Because people can hack it, people can try and guess it, try various combinations and permutations, and try to get at your password. So how do you make this? How do you have a stronger authentication control? Well, there are really two ways. One of the ways is what's known as two-factor authentication. So in two-factor authentication, what's being done is you have to. So you've typed in your username, then you're being asked to type in a password. The password is actually a combination of two things. It is the first part of the password is your traditional password, which could be, whatever people traditionally set as their passwords, maybe your mother's maiden name combined with your birth date or something like that. Traditional passwords are often found to be, passwords of that nature, which means something to the user, and therefore they remember them. So the token-based two-factor authentication is the concatenation of that traditional password plus a randomly generated number. So where is that randomly generated number coming from? It's coming from what's known as a token. Token is like a credit card, except that's the physical size of a token, except it has some electronics in it. And what that electronics in it is doing is generating a randomly changing number. It could be an 8-digit number. And so it's that 8-digit number that's being displayed is a random number. And every 30 seconds or 10 seconds, depending on that's a configurable parameter, that random number is going to change. It's going to change to a different random number. The password is the traditional password concatenated with this random number as the second part of your password. So it's a dynamic password because it's changing from the next time you'll see a different random number. And the sequence of random numbers is synchronized with the sequence that is expected at the server. So the server expects to see this sequence of random numbers. And so the sequence that is being generated with your smart card is synchronized with the sequence that the server where you have your account expects to see. And that's how, and that's the password. So it's two-factor because you need two factors. One is you need the traditional password that you may have memorized, or if it's a number that is again a random, some random collection of characters, then you may have memorized that, or you may be keeping it somewhere on your person, a piece of paper that you've written that on. So you need that, and plus you need the random number generated by the token. So this is called smart card or token-based two-factor authentication. This method of authentication is actually becoming quite popular in the financial services industry. So now if you open an account with Charles Schwab or E-Trade or TD Ameritrade or Fidelity, they will actually give you the option of doing two-factor authentication. And it's a good option to accept because this will make your account much more secure. Now, the military, for some reason, doesn't really like the two-factor authentication too much, and their favorite form of stronger authentication is biometric authentication. So either a fingerprint or a retina scan, and those are also very secure because two different people don't have exactly the same fingerprint. So that's also pretty secure. The military seems to favor biometric. The general industry, particularly the financial services industry, seems to favor the two-factor authentication. So after you've been authenticated, which means you've come into the server and you have been authenticated, whatever method has been used, two-factor or biometric, you are then the question becomes, well, what are you allowed to access? There are several applications in the IT infrastructure of a company. Which applications do you have access to? You may have accounts on databases. Well, which databases should you be given access to? And even some of the accounts, the access could be at the record level or the cell level, the data cell level. So all this is actually handled through policy management software. So policy management software enforces, it first defines the policies around what applications you can access and what data you can access, and it enforces that. So behind the authentication software, you have the authorization policy management software as well. So these are controls that are securing your environment. Now we talked about these viruses and worms and whatnot getting into your IT infrastructure from the internet and infecting your PCs and servers. How do you protect against that? Well, the firewall is the default software that protects you against the malware coming in from the outside. Now, firewalls are not foolproof. They often give you this impression that, well, if you have a firewall, you're 100% protected. No, by no means. The firewall is a backward-looking device. So it can prevent only viruses and worms and other malware that it knows about. But it has no protection against new malware and viruses and worms that people in some of these countries like Czechoslovakia and Slovenia and Belarus. Apparently, Eastern Europe has become a hotbed for the origination of some of these viruses and worms. And if you don't, if your firewall doesn't know what somebody in their basement or laboratory in Slovenia or Belarus have cooked up, well, then your firewall has no protection against it. Because how the firewall works is it looks at the digital signature of the virus. So everything ultimately in computers, be it the way it's stored or it's transmitted, it's all in zeros and ones. So a particular virus is a certain combination, is a certain string of zeros and ones, and virus, and that's called the digital signature. And viruses and firewalls have a database of the signatures, the digital signatures of these viruses. So when some packet is trying to come in through the firewall from the outside, the firewall is looking at whether that digital signature is there in this stream of bits coming in from the outside. And if it finds that digital signature, then it has recognized a virus or worm or malware in general. But if the digital signature has not been embedded in its, has not been put into its database of digital signatures, then it has no ability to recognize a certain piece of malware to be malware. So you have to constantly update your base of, to quickly discover what the new malware that these people in Belarus have dreamt up, and then quickly update the database of digital signatures that are with the firewalls, with your subscribers, with your customers. You have to quickly update that database. Only then will a new virus be detected. And if the digital signature is not there in the database, then the new virus will merely flow through the firewall. The firewall is completely defenseless against it. Another form of security control is encryption. So we said that, okay, all right, a person has hacked into your system, has guessed the password through some method, and is now inside your system. And therefore, and so maybe it's a person doing industrial espionage or a person with a foreign intelligence agency, and they now want to steal your trade secrets or other valuable information. Well, if those files were encrypted, then they could not do much with the information, even though they could steal the file, but if that file is encrypted, then they don't know what is in the file. So encryption is one of the security technologies that is used. However, encryption is not bulletproof. So there are weaknesses with encryption. So let's talk about them. So the first form of encryption that has been used was known as symmetric key encryption. So what encryption is it's taking data in its original form, maybe it's a text file, and it is converting it to scrambled text. So it's scrambling the characters. So what is clear text is completely scrambled when it has gone through the encryption process. So that scrambled text is just gobbledygook. You can't make out what this jumble of characters is. Yes, you could read the original file, but you can't read the scrambled file or the scrambled message. So there is an algorithm that converts the clear text, the file you can read, into the scrambled text. This conversion process is done by means of a key. In other words, the encryption algorithm needs an input key when it converts the clear text to scrambled text. And on the receiving end, the scrambled text is decrypted. So the decryption algorithm actually needs the same key to convert the scrambled text into clear text. The key is nothing but it's not a physical key, of course. It's nothing but a password. So the key is nothing but a password. So to do the encryption, the sender needs that to know that password. So the encryption algorithm will convert this clear text into scrambled text. And at the receiving end, the recipient needs that password to do the reverse process of converting the scrambled text into clear text. So this method of encryption is also known as symmetric key encryption. Why symmetric key? Because, well, both the user, both the sender and the receiver need the same key, need the same password. The weakness of the symmetric key encryption, and it is a pretty glaring weakness, is that before is that before both the sender and the receiver have that key, nothing is encrypted. Nothing can be sent that is encrypted. In other words, only after the sender and the receiver have that key, have that password, can a secure channel be formed, so that the messages can be encrypted using that key, and they could be decrypted using that key. So the secure channel is only formed after the key has been shared by the sender to the receiver. So after the sender and the receiver both have that key, then only then a secure channel of communications is established. But then the question becomes, well, how does the sender securely send that key in the first place? There's no secure channel before the key has been shared by the sender to the receiver. There's no secure channel before that key has been set. So the question is, well, how is the key itself securely sent to the receiver? And that is its weakness. There is no secure way of how the sender could securely send the key to the receiver. I mean, the sender could call the receiver up on the phone and say, "Hey, this is the key." It could be indicated in a sense. It's a password basically, so it could be indicated in a sense in a sequence of letters and numbers. Uh, if it is a bit based key, which means it is formatted in bits, of zeros and ones, then they could read out the pattern of zeros and ones that constitutes the key. But if you did this sort of phone network is not a secure network. There are all kinds of people who are tapping into the phone network, both the good guys and the bad guys. If you did it over the internet, as we have said, is also not a secure network. All packets on the internet are flying in the clear, which means the body of the packet is not encrypted, not by default. It's flying in the clear. So if you were to send the key to the internet, well, then again you have the same problem that the internet by default is not encrypted. So the symmetric key encryption had this glaring weakness. There was really no method of securely communicating the key, the password, from the sender to the receiver. Before that key has been shared, you have no secure channel of communications. Then you have to rely on other channels of communication that are not secure, like the phone network or the general internet. So this weakness then needed to be corrected, because it was a pretty glaring weakness. And the weakness was corrected by a more stronger form of encryption known as public key, private key encryption. So in public key, private key encryption, it is not a symmetric key. There's a matched pair of keys, and there's a public key and a Looks like there was an outage in the network connection. So I'm not sure at what point it got disconnected. I may have to review the recording to see at what point we lost the connection, but there appears to be an outage somewhere. So it's asking me to reload the file. So let me do that. So I was on the topic of security controls, and I was discussing encryption as a security control. So this is, we're saying that, well, if somebody has hacked into your computer and is trying to steal a file, well, if that file is encrypted, then they won't be able to really get to the information because the information has been encrypted. So encryption is a control, is a security control, and a very major security control. However, there are weaknesses to encryption, and that's what I was talking about. So one of the weaknesses is the fact that in symmetric key encryption, so encryption basically is that the sender wants to send some text, some data of some kind to you, and the information, so let's say it's textual information, is then transformed from clear text, which is text that you can read. So those are characters that you can read, into scrambled text. Scrambled text is just a gobbledygook, bunch of characters which have no intelligible meaning. So the scrambled text then has to be decrypted. So the sender encrypts the clear text, which is the conversion of the clear text to scrambled text. And in this process, you need a key. This key is like a password. So the encryption process needs a key, the password. And the decryption process in symmetric key encryption needs the same key to decrypt the scrambled message into clear text. It needs the same key for the decryption process. And I was saying that the weakness of symmetric key encryption is that the sender and the receiver have to have the same key. Once they have the same key, then a secure channel has been established between the sender and the receiver. Because once they have the same key, then the sender can send all the messages and other information they want to send, encrypted using the password, using the key, and then the receiver will decrypt it using the same key. But before the secure channel has been established, then the sender, there's no secure way of sending anything from the sender to the receiver. So the question becomes, well, how do you send the password? How do you send the password? That is to say, how do you send the key from the sender to the receiver in a secure fashion? Well, you cannot, because the secure channel only exists after the sender and the receiver both have the same shared key. Before that, you have no secure channel. So if you want to send it down the internet, well, it'll fly in the clear. The network packets flying around in the internet, being transmitted in the internet, are not encrypted by default. So the user portions of those network packets are perfectly readable. So your key will be seen. There are so many people sniffing and snooping on the internet that people can see what your key is. If you call up the person and read out the key, well, the phone network is being tapped as well, both by the good guys and the bad guys, so they can see what the key is. So this was a glaring weakness of the encryption process. Used in symmetric key, there was no secure way of conveying the key, the single key that is used by both the sender and the receiver. This was corrected in the second approach, which is called public key encryption. So here, each principal, a principal is somebody who wants to participate in secure communications. Each principal is given keys, a public key and a private key. Only the private key needs to be kept securely by that individual. The public key for that individual is kept in a public database. So let's say you want to send me some secure communications. So me, Professor Ghosh, somebody wants to send me secure communications. Well, I have a private key, which I'm going to keep securely and safely. And I also have a public key, which anybody can see, and it's kept in a public database. The sender, somebody wants to send me a secure message that only I can read, is going to encrypt that message using my public key. So Professor Ghosh's public key, which is kept in a public database. The sender is going to retrieve Professor Ghosh's public key and encrypt the message using that public key. The message is encrypted, it's scrambled text. So the only way you can make any sense out of that scrambled text is to decrypt it. The decryption process is different from the encryption-decryption process used in symmetric keying. In the decryption process here, it is using the private key. Now, the private key is something I have, so only I can decrypt a message that has been encrypted using my public key. Anybody can pick up my public key from the public database, and then any file, any message they want to send to me, they will encrypt using my public key. And when it reaches me, I'm going to decrypt using my private key, which I hold securely. So that's how the encryption is done. So this public key, private key encryption does not have the drawback that the symmetric key encryption does. So in this sense, this is a much stronger form of authentication. Well, these days, it's really all about the internet and e-commerce. So most of the time, when you're browsing on the web, well, you're interacting with some kind of a website. And there are two types of websites. One is a secure website, and you know that you're interacting with a secure website when you see this kind of a padlock appear on the URL. So when you see this padlock, that tells you that you are interacting with a secure website. That tells you that the packets that are being exchanged between you and let's say a financial services firm such as a Charles Schwab, well, those packets are all encrypted. So nobody can see the details of the transaction that you're making, that you're doing with your financial services firm, since those packets are encrypted. There is no visibility into that into the transaction details, since the body of the packets, it's encrypted. Nobody can know what it is unless you have the decryption key that you use to decrypt the packet and then see what is contained in the packet. The other type of website, which does not use encryption, well, most browsers will tell you if that padlock is not appearing, if that lock icon is not appearing, that means the website is actually not a secure website. It is not. Now, if you're interacting with this website, you're typing in your username and password, well, everybody can see it. If this website requires you to log into it, and so you type in a username and password, well, then everybody can see it. It's not a secure website. So, we talked about it when we were doing the lab. I provided a bit of an introduction to how the internet works. that the person sitting before the browser, well, they send an HTTP GET message to some website. That website will return with that web page. And that's basically how this interaction works. Now, one detail that I left out is actually there are two versions of the HTTP protocol. And they're called HTTP, and the other version is HTTPS. Actually, this should be HTTPS. The other version is HTTPS. Now, when you're interacting with a secure website, so you're interacting with a website like this, which has a padlock, you are actually using the HTTPS protocol. And your packets that you're sending them, the passwords that you're typing and everything, those packets are all encrypted. When you're using the plain HTTP protocol, and that is what you'll be using if you're interacting with a website, which indicates right there, and most browsers will indicate in some fashion whether the website that you're interacting with is a secure website or not. So when you're working with a non-secure website, then you're actually using the HTTP protocol, the plain vanilla protocol. Now, the HTTPS protocol, it uses a protocol beneath it called the SSL protocol, or the Secure Sockets Layer. So when you're interacting with the with a secure website, what has happened is your browser, the client that you're in, your client machine, your PC or your laptop, that has established a session, a connection with the remote end of the transport layer. So the transport layer of the client machine has established a connection with the transport layer of the destination machine, the server machine. And through that connection, all the packets that are being transmitted are actually encrypted. So the body of the packets that are being transmitted are encrypted. And this mechanism is essentially called the Secure Sockets Layer. So the HTTPS protocol, your browser, when it's interacting with one of those secure websites, is actually going to encrypt the packets. And this is the protocol that we refer to as the SSL protocol, which is a layer above the transport layer. Actually, the name has changed. These days, it's being referred to as transport layer security, but it used to be the secure sockets layer. And what it's doing is it's making this connection between the TCP entity. I said there was a protocol stack at the originating host computer, and there is a protocol stack, the TCP IP and the link layer, and there's a protocol stack at the other end. So at the source end, this TCP protocol layer entity is establishing a connection with the TCP protocol entity at the other end. And basically, the two are agreeing that they will now transmit only encrypted packets. And there's actually an exchange happening here of what the session key is. So the session key is the key that's going to encrypt all the packets that are going to be transported over this session till you close the session. Then the session key has no further value once the session is closed. But for the duration of the session, all the packets are encrypted by the session key. So what happens is that there is a handshake that is going on between the client and the server, where the client is making sure that they're talking to the legitimate server. I referred to the phishing problem, I think at an earlier point in this lecture. The phishing problem is where a server masquerades as as the genuine server, but it's a malicious server. The phishing server, its goal is to collect your username and passwords, collect your account information, and also be able to see through the transaction details. It'll be able to see what, how much, what is in your account and that kind of thing. So the goal of the phishing server is to steal all this information. And then it'll masquerade as you and basically conduct fraudulent transactions against your financial services firm, pretending to be you and essentially cleaning your account out, which is what they do. So therefore, the client machine is concerned about two things. The client, if you will, the human user, is concerned about two things. They want to make sure that they are not giving out their username and password to a phishing server, who would then steal their username and password and then essentially masquerade as them and then log into their account and clean out their account. So that's one of the things that they're very concerned about. Am I actually talking to a phishing server who's pretending to be my financial services firm, Charles Schwab, or am I actually talking to Charles Schwab website itself, the genuine one? And once it has authenticated the server, so verifying the identity that it's not a phishing server is known as authentication. So once the client has authenticated the server, then they would send packets and do whatever is the transaction they were about to do. And all of those packets will be encrypted using the session key. So there's actually a two-phase process that really takes place here. One is the authentication. So there's an authentication phase where the client is making sure that they are talking with the genuine server. They're actually talking with their with the genuine web server, for their financial services firm. And after the authentication phase, then the data transfer phase proceeds. This authentication phase is done using the public key, private key. So this authentication is done using asymmetric authentication. Then in the data transfer phase, the packets are encrypted by the session key. So when we talk about SSL, the SSL protocol is actually employing both asymmetric encryption, the public key, private key encryption, and that's for authentication. And then in the data transfer phase, it's using symmetric encryption. So there's a handshake that goes on between the client machine and the server machine, where all this authentication is happening. So I've provided here a somewhat simplified view of the SSL handshake. It's somewhat more complex than this, but this is the basic gist of it, of what's happening. So essentially, during the authentication phase, the client is authenticating the server. It's making sure you are talking to the right server. And as part of this authentication phase, there's also the session key that is being securely sent by the client machine to the server machine. And so the session key is typically generated at the client machine. There are some other variations where it might be generated at the server machine, but just giving you the basic simplified version, the session key by which all the packets transmitted during data transfer will be encrypted is generated by the client machine, and it's securely sent to the server machine. So how is it securely sent? Well, what it does is it's sending the session key and also some random number, and it's encrypting this initial packet with the session key and the random number using the server's public key. So remember, in asymmetric or public key, private key authentication, the public keys are kept in a public repository. So the client machine can easily go into that public repository and retrieve whatever is the server's public key. And then it's going to send this information, the session key and the random number, encrypted using the server's public key. Now, the server, the genuine server, has the private key. A phishing server would not, because the private key is a secret. It's a deep, deep secret held by the principal, be it a computer, be it a human. So any principal that is interacting and conducting transactions in a secure environment has a private key, which they hold very closely. So this message that has been sent by the client machine to the server machine by encrypting using the public key, this message can only be decrypted by the right person who has the private key. The phishing server does not have the private key. The genuine server has the private key. So the genuine server, so they're sending it to this, and if it did reach the genuine server, then the genuine server can decrypt that message. And what it's going to do is it's going to then send back the random number that was initially sent by the client machine, encrypted by the session key. This handshake verifies that the server machine that the client is talking to is the genuine server machine. It's this handshake that does that verification. And this is the authentication phase that precedes the data transfer phase. So now if the client machine that had generated this random number, if it sees that it is that random number that came back, and it came back encrypted using the session key that the client had generated, then the client is 100% sure that they are talking with the right server, because anybody else would not have been able to decrypt this information, this packet, containing the session key and containing a random number. Nobody else would have been able to decrypt that. Only the genuine server can decrypt it, because it is only they who have that private key. And therefore, the genuine server can then decrypt it. They can recover the session key and the random number. And what they're going to do is they're first going to send back that random number generated by the client, encrypted by the session key. So that random number is also not sent in the clear. It is encrypted by the session key, which the client had generated and sent to the server during the authentication phase. So when the client machine gets back that, and then it will decrypt this packet sent by the server using the session key that the client had generated, and they can see that, hey, okay, I got exactly the same random number that I had generated and sent to the server. So it's only the genuine server who could have, since it's only the genuine server that has the server's private key, would have been able to send me that same random number back to me. And furthermore, sent me that same random number back to me, encrypted by the session key that I had generated. So now this client is 100% certain that they are indeed talking to the right server, the genuine server, and not a phishing server that is trying to steal their username and password. So now the data transfer can ensue. The person can log in and then log in comfortably, knowing that nothing is being stolen by any snooper on the internet, because everything after the authentication phase, all the data that you're transmitting, including your username and password, are all encrypted using the session key. And therefore now you can have a secure session with the remote end. The reason why we don't encrypt the packets using using public key private key encryption is that the public key private key, the length of that can be quite long. Could be 256 bytes minimum, could be even 512 bytes, even 1024 bytes if you're very, 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 very security conscious. So now if we encrypted all the data transfer packets by that very long encryption key, the performance is going to suffer, because then each of those packets would have to be first encrypted using the long key and then decrypted using a long key. That takes time. Therefore, the session key is typically much smaller than the length of the private key and the public key. So whereas you may have, let's say the public key, private key, let's say they're 512 bytes long, the session key is typically no more than 128 bytes. That is still pretty goddamn secure. Pardon my French here, but that is still very secure. There's a lot of opinion out there as to, hey, we can break 128-bit encryption, we can break, but you have to actually discount most of that. The only thing that can be broken really is the 56 and 64 byte keys, those keys that are much smaller. 128 bytes, that nobody has done a public demonstration of being able to break 128 bytes. The computer scientist theorists would argue that breaking 128 bytes is virtually impossible, and anything above that, 256 bytes or 512, I mean, that is unthinkable. That simply cannot be broken using using even a form of supercomputers. So that's why we tend to use long keys during the authentication phase and then shorter keys during the data transfer phase, where you can be guaranteed you're getting very good security. 128 bytes is, like I said, gilt-edged security. And the performance is also much faster, and you're not trying to decrypt each packet and encrypt each packet by very long keys. So this is kind of the handshake that goes on when you're establishing an SSL session. It's now also called transport layer security because it's really operating at the transport layer. And so do not make it ambiguous as to where this additional layer of security is really operating. It is operating at the transport layer. So when the originating transport layer entity in the originating host makes a connection with the destination transport layer entity, it can, if it chooses, engage the encryption, meaning engage the transport layer security. So if the application is security conscious, then the transport layer entity is going to engage transport layer security, TLS. Used to be called SSL for people who may have come across that term before. Now, virtual private network. So you may ask, well, if you have SSL or TLS security, then why do we need a virtual VPNs as well? So VPN is not SSL or TLS. It's something else. It is over and above SSL and TLS. And so people may ask, well, why do we need another layer? And VPN will do, if you engage VPN, it means you're doing a second layer of encryption. So you're encrypting the thing twice. And well, obviously people will ask, why do we need to encrypt it twice? Okay, so one deficiency of the SSL encryption is that SSL, or now known as TLS, so I should also say /TLS, which means it's a protocol that is operating at the transport layer. One weakness of it is it encrypts the user data, yes. So user data meaning everything, including the packets carrying your username and your password. All of those packets um, are all encrypted. The user data is encrypted, so nobody can see it. But the protocol header, which has things like the source IP address and the destination IP address, they are not encrypted. The protocol header is not encrypted. The reason being, well, the routers in the internet cloud, they have to look at the protocol header to know where to send the packet to. Well, but the problem is that now the source IP address is visible. So the client's IP address is visible. So this is the problem. This is the red flag. Because when people who want to do bad things to you, when they attack you, they attack your computers. So they want to know what is your IP address. That's how they're going to, and that's what they're going to attack. So if you're very security conscious, not only do you want your information to travel securely, the transactions you're making to travel securely so they cannot be seen by anybody, but you also don't want to make your IP address visible. It is to solve this problem that VPN was invented. So what happens in VPN is that the SSL packet, or the SSL or TLS packet, using the modern term will be the TLS packet. This whole thing is enclosed within an outer protocol layer. So this entire packet with the source IP address and everything, that is placed in the body of an outer packet, is encapsulated within an outer packet, which has its own protocol layer, and it has its own source and IP, source and destination IP addresses. And it is this which is transmitted through the internet. So basically, what is going on between the client and the server that want to communicate over a VPN connection is that those SSL packets or TLS packets, they themselves are encrypted and put within an outer protocol layer packet, which will have the source IP address of the VPN tunnel. So this is also referred to as a VPN tunnel. So the packets being sent by the client that are now put inside this outer encapsulating packet, the outer encapsulating packet will have as its source and destination addresses the source IP address of the originating point of the VPN tunnel, and the destination IP address corresponds to the terminating end of the VPN tunnel. So as far as the addresses are concerned, around which there is so much sensitivity, because, like I said, your IP address being visible to the rest of the world is not a good thing if you're very security conscious, because people will target your IP address. They will. That's, they have some. You have some private information that they want to get to. Well, they're going to target the computer, which has your private information. So that's why this VPN tunnel is an outer tunnel. You can call the SSL tunnel the inner tunnel, and the VPN tunnel as the outer tunnel through the internet. And when the packets are being sent through the VPN tunnel, then their source and their true source and true destination addresses are being hidden. And what you're seeing, what people sniffing and snooping on the internet cloud, what they're seeing is the source IP address of the tunnel and the destination IP address of the tunnel. and the actual IP addresses is actually the IP, the source IP address is actually completely hidden. So so this offers you another level of protection where not only is the body of the transaction details completely hidden, but the source and the true source and the true destination IP addresses are also hidden. So and the source IP address, could be anything, could essentially be anything, in order to disguise the true source. So this this source end of the VPN tunnel really can be anything. Could be some address in some other part of the world, even to completely disguise the originating point of the VPN tunnel. The destination point has to correspond to a true destination point because it has to, these packets have to exit the tunnel and reach the server. So the destination point is a true IP address, but the originating point of the VPN tunnel can be really anything. Could even be an IP address in some other, in some other state, perhaps even some other country, because the routers of the internet, they don't really have to they don't really have to look at the source IP address. They look at the destination IP address to ensure that that packet is being routed to the correct, towards the correct destination. But they're not really looking at the source IP address. So therefore, to get maximum protection in terms of disguising the source, is you can make the source end of the VPN tunnel be anything. So this gives you further protection. Now, in terms of, I alluded to this point also a bit earlier, in terms of the claims that are made on breaking encryption. Yes, encryption can be broken, which means, if it's 56 bytes, then run it through all possible permutations and combinations of 56 bits, and ultimately you will hit the right combination that that breaks the encryption. Just like, when you're trying to break into a safe, and if you if you keep trying and trying and trying, and you hit the right combination, well, that'll get you entry into the safe. Well, similarly, so if you try every possible permutation and combination of 56 bits, if it's a 56-bit key, or if 128 bits, if it's a 128-bit key, if you try every possible permutation combination of those bits, you will hit upon the combination that breaks the packet, that decrypts the packet. But you need massive compute power to do that, to run through all possible permutations and combinations of 128 bits. And what these studies have shown is that, well, if you go to the higher order bits, like 256 and beyond, that's completely out of the question. Even with a bank of supercomputers, it'll take you literally millions of years or billions of years, as some of the studies quote. Essentially, the message is that, well, 256-bit and above is simply not theoretically possible. To run through all the combinations will take you billions of years. So it's virtually not doable. Now, the controversy is about 128 bits. Can we break 128? Yes, we can break 56 and 64-bit encryption. This has been demonstrated. So there was a demo done, and different people have done this, where they showed that they could, in a matter of a certain number of hours, and this number of hours obviously shrinks as you make your PCs, and as you put more compute power into the PC or the server, then this can shrink. But it has been shown that it can be broken in a matter of some number of hours. The 128-bit, nobody has done a public demo of being able to break 128 bits. So, I don't know if the sort of the intelligence agencies can break this. And there, like I said, there are again lots of claims made, but the scientific papers that have been published in the realm of breaking encryption essentially says that 128-bit encryption also cannot be broken, no matter how much compute power you throw at it. It's only if you have some knowledge of how this 128 bits was chosen. If in the 128 bits you've chosen your mother's maiden name or your birth date or that of your spouse. So if you have some knowledge of what went into the creation of the 128 bits, then it is conceivable that can be broken. But if this is a true randomly chosen 128 bits, then again the thing is it will take you millions of years to break it by running through all the possible permutations and combinations of 128 bits. We talked about wireless networks and the fact that with wireless networks, well, you can sniff the packets. So the early ways of defeating this was that, well, these packets are encrypted. So yes, again, yes, that's true. The packets were encrypted, and so they were not in clear text. And then it comes back to, well, how do you break the encryption? So the early Wi-Fi standard that was used to encrypt the network packets was a standard called WEP, which used the same key for encrypting all the packets that were flying on the network. And the people who tried to break this, well, what they did was they collected sufficient number of packets, and then they, with having collected sufficient number of packets, that gives you help in trying to break the encryption. If you have a set of packets which are encrypted with that same key, and then they could essentially found ways to break the encryption. So WEP security, which was used in the early Wi-Fi networks, became insecure because the bad guys could break it. So the next level of encryption is something called WPA, where the packets are not encrypted using the same key or the same password. So here you're doing dynamic keying. Just like, if you think back to dynamic passwording, the two-factor authentication, where the password is essentially being changed because it's two factors. It's your static password plus that randomly generated number. So the next time you try to access it, you try to access the account, well, you got to, the password is a different password because the random number has changed. So that's called dynamic passwording. So here, it's conceptually similar in WPA. In other words, you're doing dynamic keying, which means that the network packets are encrypted using a different key. So that's called dynamic keying. That's the WPA. And that offers you, obviously, much better protection. And WPA has not been broken as yet. So right now, Wi-Fi networks are secure from that standpoint. Policies, controls for implementing policies around availability and disaster recovery, this 9.99% availability. How do you deliver that? Well, typically it was delivered through standby servers. So what they would do is they would have a production server, which is handling the main transactions, and then they would have a standby server which is doing disk mirroring. Disk mirroring is they are mirroring the disk which is on which you're recording the transactions on the primary server. So the primary server has the transactions being recorded, and the standby server is mirroring. It's basically replicating the disk of the primary server. So the primary server, something happens, there's a disk crash or something, and the primary server goes down, then the backup server immediately takes over. The backup server has the same state as the primary server because the backup server is mirroring the disk in the primary server. So it has the same copy of the transactions. So this works well. This can be used to give you 5 nines availability, except when something like a 9/11 or Katrina happens, because the primary server and the standby server are in the same data center. When a 9/11 or a Katrina happens, the entire data center is taken out. So then that problem, that solution didn't work. So what they now did, and this was pretty much an innovation after 9/11, that they figured out how to do disk mirroring of the wide area network. The internet is a pretty fast network these days because there's so much fiber optic bandwidth in there. So disk mirroring could not be done over the wide area network when the internet was fast. You couldn't, the standby server, if it's not in the same data center and connected to the primary server with a high-speed network, with high-speed local area network. If the standby server is somewhere else, in some other part of the city, and its connection to the primary server is over the wide area internet, then disk mirroring could not be done when the latency was too large. The latency, which is the delay in the communications between the primary and the secondary, when that latency was too large, then disk mirroring over the wide area network was not possible. The standby server could not, in real time, keep up with the transactions, keep up with recording the transactions occurring in the primary server. But now, with the internet speeds having advanced and fiber optic internet, wide area internets are pretty fast, and also disk mirroring technique, now they have shown that they can do disk mirroring over the wide area network, which means even if there's an incident like a 9/11 which takes down the that entire part of the city, well, your secondary backup servers, which are there in some remote part of the city or on a different city unit, they could be doing, and they're doing disk mirroring. They could take up the job instantaneously off the primary server. So you can fail over in real time. So basically, what this is the disk mirroring over the wide area network. This technology, what it's doing is you're able to fail over in real time to the standby server, and the standby server immediately takes up the role of the production server or the primary server. Software quality. These are about controls, again, to protect yourself from human mistakes, essentially. You see, the software can get corrupted, the databases can get corrupted by human error. There are, database administrators and system administrators who look after these things, who maintain these things, and human error can play a part and corrupt the databases. So, you got to have. So the controls to these are again quite basic and simple. You can have transactions being generated at a certain frequency to test the integrity of the databases. So you can generate a test transaction, and if you don't see the result that you expect to see, then you can suspect that there's been some corruption in the database, which merits going in there and then hunting to resolve the problem. So those are controls in the area of software quality. The MIS audit, this too is a control. It's a human-based control where, the MIS audit is about a team of external auditors coming into your company and checking out your IT infrastructure. So it could be a team such as from Price. There are various well-known companies that do this. Price Waterhouse Coopers. They could come in and check out your servers and your systems, your accounts. Oftentimes, they may find that there are issues with some of your accounts. Like some accounts have weak passwords or no passwords at all. These external auditors have often found problems of that nature. Also, one of the good values that these external auditors bring is that they have war stories. In other words, they have audited other firms and they've gained valuable knowledge about the vulnerabilities, about the mistakes and the vulnerabilities they found in other firms. And they bring the knowledge to your firm when you hire them. PricewaterhouseCoopers House, it's a well-known IT auditing firm and an IT consultant in general. And so they bring the knowledge that they have acquired from other firms and to your company, and that's useful. In fact, the vulnerability in the Wi-Fi networks. I joined industry back in the early 90s, and Wi-Fi has been there from since that time. The early security standards were WEP based, and we thought that WEP was very secure, that there really nothing vulnerable about Wi-Fi, the packets. So why should that be vulnerable? But it's we did MIS audits at Digital Equipment, where I used to work for, and it's our auditors who came in and said that, no, wait a second. We are hearing from our other customers that Wi-Fi has this vulnerability in security, that people are breaking the encryption through collecting a number of Wi-Fi packets, they're encrypted using that same key, and they're using that knowledge in breaking the encryption. So that's when we moved from WEP to the WPA standard. It was really something that was driven by the external MIS audit that we did, internal within the company. So that's a value of the external auditors. Okay, that's my that's the topic of, and so I will conclude at this point.